Al Jazeera Podcasts.
When US President Donald Trump introduced sweeping tariffs earlier this year, the spotlight was on industries like steel and automobiles. But what wasn't widely talked about was how those tariffs could impact the costs of everyday items used mostly by women, like tampons, bras, makeup, and personal care products. Many of these were already more expensive due to the pink tax. So I want to understand how these tariffs work and the impact they have on women around the world. I'm Samantha Johnson, and this is Now You Know, a safe space where we go all in on stories about women, so by the end of each episode, you can say, now I know. Prachi Agarwal is a research fellow at the International Economic Development Group at ODI Global. Her work focuses on trade policy issues and women in trade. And she's here today to explain how tariffs work and how women are more impacted by it than men. So, Prachi, thank you so much for joining us on Now You Know.
Yeah, hi. Hi. Very glad to be here. Thank you for having me. It's a very interesting topic to have this conversation about, and I'm really excited.
Indeed. So, Prachi, I suppose to understand how we got here today, I suppose we have to look back at when the pink tax gained traction, and that was back in the 90s. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a full-blown millennial. So when I look back at that period, I do remember this feeling of, okay, sisterhood, women having, just more agency, spending power. I'm just thinking this full-blown Spice Girl power era. I'm just wondering, how did that lead to this moment where women are paying more for items, and I'm talking about basic items, than men?
That's a very interesting take on it, because I'm also a millennial, and I remember, everything about being girl power. You rightly mentioned the Spice Girls. It was about Barbie, about pink power. And the interesting bit is that these pink tariffs or pink taxes are not new. Women have always been paying more for things. We just never knew about it. So until recently, research wasn't conducted on how women are impacted as a matter of monetary policy or trade policy in countries. And it's now slowly gaining traction. So suddenly people are getting up and realizing that, oh God, women do pay more. But it's always been the case. It's not new.
There's a lot of pink being thrown around here. I mean, pink tariffs, pink taxes. Can you just tell me what's the difference between a pink tax and a pink tariff?
Sure. So pink taxes is an umbrella term. So pink taxes can include internal taxes or national taxes, as well as international ones. And pink tariffs specifically are for trade policy. So these are applied on goods that are traded across borders. So what I'm trying to say is that pink taxes would essentially include all tariffs as well.
When I think about, women getting taxed more or just paying for more, I don't understand the reasons why. Going back to the 90s, and again, I'm thinking of, Spice Girls was just on like every merchandise, or it was just ridiculously girly. It made me think about the advertising side of it. I mean, how much does targeted advertising contribute to women spending more?
Yes, that is a factor. So most modern day advertising, or even in the past actually, has been such that when it's targeting women consumers, the marketing is such that you need more. So first they make you feel ugly, or they make you feel that there's something lacking in you. And then they say, oh, here, look, there's a product. You can use makeup. You can wear nicer clothes. You need to somehow buy more clothes every few months. You need new things, new lingerie, new this and new that, fancy, flashy things, new jewelry, just to make you feel beautiful. So the whole marketing strategy has been that women intrinsically need more things. And that's why it's actually, when you see the data, you see that women end up buying or consuming more things than men. This issue is everywhere. It's in marketing. It's in this whole perception that if you go and ask a retailer, why are you selling a particular woman's clothing why is it more expensive than a man's? Their main comeback is it's more expensive to produce women's clothing. Let me tell you now, that's a myth. it's not more expensive. There are, yes, some items that perhaps if you have frills or if you have embroidery, it can be more expensive or more labor intensive, so as to say, which can cost more. But men's garments need more tailoring as opposed to women's. So they tend to be more expensive or more precise. So there's been a whole myth going on, and that has led to the fact that they're able to justify that they can charge higher prices for women's goods.
And this is why women all over the world are feeling exhausted. I mean, we are living in a world where women globally get paid less than men, yet we still have to spend more. I mean, women get paid 77 cents for every dollar a man makes on average. Again, we still have to pay more. If you look at the US and tariffs, on women's clothing, they have to pay about 3% higher than men's. And if we look globally, women in India have to pay 7 to 13% higher. And in South Africa, about 13 to 19% more than men for personal products like razors. Now, if you take into consideration that we as women have to pay more on basic essentials, what does it say about how women are impacted financially in the long term?
Women make less than men. I think the US stat is about 90 cents to $1. It differs across countries, but most low-income or middle-income countries would have a much larger disparity in women's wages as compared to men. On top of that, women's wages are adjust more slowly to inflation than men's in most countries. And if you look at single parent households, they are usually headed by women. So women are also responsible for purchasing all things related to children. And that means there's a higher expenditure on consumer products for a larger family in single parent households. So when you bring all of those three together, you realize that women end up spending so much more than men. And this essentially means that over the long term, there is a massive erosion of savings. So women are not going to save as much as a man perhaps by the time they reach their retirement ages. So because you're constantly spending more and you're earning less at the same time, you're not saving enough. And this is worse in developing countries or the global south, as we say it. It's not just in the US where tariffs are higher. It is literally every country. There's a pattern that women's products have a higher tariff than a general consumer basket of goods. This includes women's clothing. It also includes bags, footwear, personal products, menstruation products, makeup, cosmetics, and lots of different other items that women purchase more than men. And if you put all of that together and you compare it to a standard basket of consumer products, you find that across all countries, and specifically so in South Asian and African countries, women's goods or women have a higher tariff than a standard consumer basket. It obviously becomes the women in the global south become worse off, because when we talk about 90 cents to $1, that's in countries like the US or European countries. In the global south, the disparity is much larger. So essentially, there's going to be a massive erosion of savings in developing or low-income and middle-income countries, and women are only getting worse off.
So let's focus on the global south for a second here, because when we were talking about the pink tax, I suppose we're looking at it from the consumer end, but you have the other side, which is the export, and the manufacturing is mainly done in the global south. So I'm just wondering how the pink tariff would affect women working in these factories that are making the clothes, that are making the products.
What we found, interestingly, is that any rise in the current tariff structure or any change, which leads to an increase in tariffs by the US on manufactured goods, would essentially be worse off for women in the global south from the supply side. So what do I mean by this? Is that once tariffs go up, it essentially means that now importers are going to have to pay a higher tax or a higher tariff at the border when they import certain goods from different countries. Now, when we talk about clothing or apparel sector, most of the manufacturing is located, as you rightly pointed out, in the global south. So, and in these factories or manufacturing units, most of the low skill and low paying jobs are occupied by women. So when a tariff goes up, it essentially means that the price in the market would go up for consumers, right? So when we talk about apparel and clothing sector, if the tariff goes up by, say, 5 or 10%, it's a hypothetical situation, it would mean that women in the market or men in the market would end up paying more. So this is the demand side. On the supply side, what happens is that the moment the tariff goes up, it means the final price in the market went up. And it also means that now exporters want to meet the earlier price. They want to be able to sell at the old price. So now that the tax has gone up, it means that your selling cost or selling price needs to go down to make sure that the final price remains the same, right? So that's what happens. So they want to now send the same products or export the same products at a lower cost. Now, where does that lower cost come from? It comes from the fact that the women that are employed in the low-income, low-skilled jobs in the manufacturing sector in the apparel industry, their jobs are going to be cut or they're going to be impacted. So there have already been massive violations of, say, human rights, gender rights, no access to sanitation, other violations that take place, and it's very frequent in, say, the garments or the textile sector. So that is also where women are impacted more, because they lose access to these jobs, they lose access to little wage, but they also lose access to, say, a healthy environment to work in.
So, in the past decade, the US tariff system has taxed women's clothing higher than men's, costing them more than $2 billion a year. Now that you have Trump slapping new tariffs left, right, and centre, I'm just wondering what will happen with the pink tariff.
So while President Trump did announce his tariffs, they have been paused for a period. But if they come back exactly how they were announced, it's going to be really troublesome for women. So I work on trade policy, as you know. So we wanted to analyze if the reciprocal tariffs that President Trump announced in April were they gender biased, and we found out that they were gender biased. And what was really, really interesting is that tariff structures for countries, and especially the US, is already gender biased. So what I mean by that is that countries that are supplying women's clothing to the US market at the moment attracted a higher reciprocal tariffs. So countries like Cambodia, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Lesotho, they are highly dependent on exports of apparel or textiles and garments to the US market. All of these exports coming from these particular countries in Africa and Southeast Asia are going to be worse off. They're going to become less competitive, and the prices are going to go up. So essentially, prices for those goods are going to be much higher than prices for, say, men's, which are coming from countries with lower tariffs.
So, yeah, I know we've focused a bit on the US and on the global south, but I just want to turn our attentions to Europe. When we look at Europe and their VAT on tampons, the highest comes in at 27%, and that's in Hungary. The lowest is no tax, no VAT, and that's in Ireland, Cyprus, and Malta. When you look at Germany, I think this is really encouraging. They actually lowered the VAT from 17% to 7% after they were listed as necessities in 2020. So countries can do it. You can lower the VAT, you can lower taxes. But I'm just wondering, is there anything being done to end the pink tax or the pink tariffs?
Yes, all your data is indeed correctly points towards the fact that it can be done. So right now I'm in the UK, and UK very recently removed the tampon tax in 2021. Like, come on. That is very recent. We should have done it much earlier, to be honest. There are countries, like you mentioned, even in Europe, where tampon taxes still exist. There are also countries in the global south where the tampon tax was actually removed, but then reintroduced. And one such country is Tanzania. That's one of the data points I found. Yeah. Tanzania removed the tampon tax and they brought it back in.
So the government, they reinstated the VAT on menstrual products because it was clear that retailers weren't reducing the prices for the customers. So I'm just wondering, how can governments make sure that retailers lower their prices?
So what you mentioned is very interesting, that they rolled back the tax because consumers could not see the change in price because retailers decided to keep the price up, which essentially means, when you break it down, what actually happened was that retailers decided, okay, we don't have to pay extra taxes to the government on this. Let's increase our markups. And the consumer won't realize that the tax has changed because perhaps it was not widely spoken about in the news. It was not covered properly. So that's the issue, that it needed to be splashed all over the screens.
But couldn't the government enforce them or make them do it?
That depends from government to government. So some governments have a policy called, or a regulation called, maximum retail price, where that is decided by governments. That is essentially what you can charge at max for a certain product in a market, irrespective of where the shop is located or who the supplier is, whether, where you're getting a supply from, or who your customer is. Most countries, I don't think, have that system in place. So I am not in a position to say that countries should do that, but that is one way to ensure that all customers pay a certain maximum retail price. So what essentially would happen then is that if a tax is reduced, say the tampon tax in this case, retailers will have to lower the price because the government would then set a new maximum retail price for that product because the taxes were cut.
What would actually happen if countries just got rid of the pink tariff?
Not too much, So when you look at the share of women's goods that are imported by countries in their total imports, these shares are very low. So essentially, if countries are to remove pink tariffs or the additional tariffs that are on women's products, they're not going to actually lose too much in revenue. So there is a strong case to be made here to say that countries can actually get rid of pink tariffs. They can tariff women's and men's clothing, for example, at the same rate, and they're not going to lose that much. So I don't see a reason why it doesn't actually happen. And they should, essentially, and there's not going to be too much loss. Even if a country is going to make its tariff policy a more gender neutral or gender positive, so as I like to call it, then nobody would know. So even if they lose out on revenue, it's just a loss for them. Nobody knows about it. So essentially, nobody knows they have actually gained from this policy change. And that's why perhaps there is less incentive to make that change.
So on a policy level, what can we do to affect change?
I think more evidence needs to be gathered by researchers, by women who are researchers as well, to just bring forth more data, more evidence to show that if there is that policies can be changed or what the impact is going to be. So when we break it down, essentially means that we need to first conduct an assessment to understand what the current policy is doing for men and women separately or other socioeconomic groups of a society, then provide evidence on what this impact is and how it can be changed. And then that is how we convince policymakers to make that change. So I think it's just, it's women in general who have a responsibility to make some noise, as we have been doing. It is happening. It is slow, but it is already happening.
I'm glad that we're having this conversation and we're getting it out there, and that some women are already doing what they can and they as I like to call it, they're kind of rigging the system. Like we already know that, okay, razors do the same thing. So I'm not going to buy a pink razor just because it's targeted towards a woman when I can just buy a male's razor and it's a lot cheaper. And it does the same thing. I think for me, after this conversation, what's really worrying is the knock-on effect when it comes to the manufacturing side and how it affects women's livelihoods, especially in the global south. So thank you for sharing your expertise. I really do appreciate you coming on to Now You Know. And yeah, let's continue the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm glad that you decided to talk about this and have me on the show. This is what we've been talking about, and this is the first step towards making some change that women should not be paying more.
I hope this conversation has been insightful for you as well. So please share your thoughts. And if you have any stories you'd like us to explore on Now You Know, just let us know in the comments. Thank you and see you again next week.